Reservation confirmation email is still in my inbox. I haven't deleted it. I'm not sure why I keep it. Maybe because it was the first thing I ever booked entirely for myself, without asking anyone's permission or checking whether it worked for the rest of the family. A cabin in Asheville, North Carolina, 5 nights, a porch that looked out over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had planned to go alone. I went alone. And it was the best trip of my life, which probably tells you everything you need to know about what came before it. My name is Laurel. I'm 31. I work in corporate insurance underwriting, which is the kind of job people nod at politely and then immediately change the subject away from at dinner parties. I'm good at it. I have always been good at the kinds of things that are useful rather than interesting. Budgets, spreadsheets, long-range planning, the fine print that everyone else hands to me because they can't be bothered. I've been doing that inside my family for almost as long as I've been doing it professionally. My sister Britt is 27. She is the kind of person rooms rearrange themselves around. She is loud in the way that people describe as vivacious. She laughs easily and cries dramatically and has never once in her life read a terms and conditions page. She does not need to. She has always had me for that. Our parents, my dad, who taught high school history for 30 years and has a gift for making you feel like you're the only person in the room when he's talking to you, and my mom, who is warm and generous and has never met a boundary she didn't find inconvenient, have always sorted us quietly into categories. Britt was the one they worried about. I was the one they didn't have to. Being the one people don't have to worry about sounds like a compliment. For a long time I accepted it as one. Here is what it actually looked like when Britt dropped out of her nursing program at 22 because she needed to find herself. It was my mother who cried, and my father who reasoned with her, and both of them who eventually agreed to cover her rent in Columbus while she figured things out. When she moved to Nashville 2 years later to pursue something adjacent to music, not performing, she was always careful to clarify, more like event production, music adjacent. It was again my parents who softened the landing. When the Nashville venture stalled and she pivoted to wedding coordination and needed a course, a laptop, some initial business expenses, those came from somewhere too. I was never told directly where. I pieced it together over time the way you piece together any family accounting. Through overheard conversations, through the specific silence that falls when certain numbers come up, through the math that didn't add up any other way. My parents were not irresponsible people. My dad had his pension. My mom had worked part-time bookkeeping into her early 60s. They were comfortable in the way that means you can handle most things, but not everything at once. And Britt kept generating everything at once situations. I started helping in ways that felt small at the time. When my dad's car needed a transmission repair 3 years ago and their savings were thin from a medical bill, I covered it. $4,300. I told him not to worry about paying it back, and he said he would anyway, and neither of us ever brought it up again. When the roof on their house in Dayton needed patching, not full replacement, just the section over the back porch, I found a contractor through my company's vendor network and handled the invoice. When my grandmother on my dad's side needed to be moved into memory care and the deposit was due before her house sold, I bridged it, $12,000, which came back to me eventually, but the float was mine for 4 months. None of this was discussed at Thanksgiving. None of it showed up anywhere that anyone would see. I didn't want recognition. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to understanding what I did later. I was not keeping score. I was doing what felt like my function in the machinery of the family, the same way I filed quarterly reports at work without needing someone to applaud. But I was keeping track, not out of resentment, just because I keep track of things. It is how my brain works. Britt got engaged in October. His name is Cooper. He is pleasant enough, works in sales, laughs at his own jokes a half second before the punchline lands, which is a small thing, but the kind of small thing that lodges itself somewhere permanent. They got engaged at a restaurant in Nashville that has a waiting list, which I know because Britt sent me the Instagram post before she called me. I heard about the proposal through a caption. The engagement party was at my parents' house in December, and I drove from Cincinnati to be there and brought good wine and stayed to help clean up, and all of that was fine. Normal. Britt was radiant in the way she always is when the room is arranged around her. Cooper gave a toast that managed to mention his own job twice. My parents looked like they had won something. The wedding planning started almost immediately. Britt had decided on a destination wedding, not abroad, but not local either. She wanted a resort in Sedona, Arizona. She had found a property that did packages, ceremony, reception, 2 nights for the couple, and a room block for guests at a negotiated rate. The venue was beautiful. I saw the photos. Terracotta and sage and red rock formations in every background. I understood the appeal. What I did not understand, until a Sunday in February when my mother called me while I was making lunch, was how the finances were being structured. My mother has a particular voice she uses when she is about to tell you something she has already decided. It is warmer than her normal voice, almost elaborately warm, the way you'd speak to someone you're about to disappoint but feel genuinely bad about. She used that voice to tell me that she and my dad had been talking and that they wanted to do something really special for Britt and that they had found a way to cover a significant portion of the wedding costs. I said that sounded wonderful and asked how. She paused in the way that meant she had rehearsed what came next. She said that over the years I had always been so generous and they were so proud of me and they felt they could ask me this because I was so capable and so understanding. I set down my spatula. She said they were hoping I could contribute, a meaningful contribution, to help make Britt's day everything she'd dreamed of. She said it the way you'd say it to someone who would obviously say yes, which is its own kind of pressure. She mentioned a number. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope because I had nothing else nearby. $14,000? I told her I needed to think about it. She said, of course, take your time, and I could hear in her voice that she had not actually expected me to need time. I took 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I reviewed my own finances, my savings, my investment accounts, my emergency fund, my retirement contributions, and I thought about what $14,000 meant in the context of everything else, and I thought about the transmission and the roof and the memory care deposit. I am not telling you this to make myself sound noble. I tell you this because I want you to understand that I did not react. I did not make a hasty decision. I considered carefully, and then I called my mother back and I told her I wouldn't be contributing. She went quiet. The quiet lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, and her voice was no longer warm, that she was surprised, that she had thought I understood what this meant to Britt, that Britt was counting on a certain level of support from the family. I said I understood that and that I was still going to pass. There was more. She said things about family and about generosity and about how I had always been able to help before and she wasn't sure what had changed. She did not ask, by the way. She did not ask what had changed or whether something was going on with me or whether 14,000 was simply too much. She framed it entirely as a shift in my character rather than a reasonable response to a significant ask. I let her finish. I said I loved her and I'd talk to her soon. We hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. My dad called the following Thursday. He is harder to hold a position against because he is genuinely kind and also because he knows exactly how to appeal to my sense of fairness. He made the case that Britt's wedding was a family event and that family events worked best when everyone contributed what they could and that he knew I could. He did not apply pressure overtly. He applied it the way you apply water, gradually, from many directions, finding the small cracks. I told him the same thing I told my mother. No, but gently. I said I hoped Britt had a beautiful wedding and I meant it. He said he was disappointed. Then he said something I have thought about every day since, something he offered almost as an aside. The way you'd mention traffic when you're actually saying something about the whole drive. He said, you know how important it is to Britt that everyone who matters is there. She just wants it to feel like a real family celebration. I said I was looking forward to being there. There was a pause. He said, about that, sweetheart. I sat down. I was in my kitchen. The refrigerator made its low, cycling hum. I sat down at the table and I waited. He said that Britt and Cooper had a limited room block at the resort, and that with Cooper's family and their closest friends, the numbers were tighter than they'd hoped, and that they'd been talking about the guest list, and he said it carefully, like a man walking across ice. that they wanted to make sure the people who'd be most comfortable in that environment were the ones who came, and that, given everything, they thought it might be easier if I attended the local dinner celebration they were planning instead, a week after the wedding. Just immediate family, very intimate. I made sure I had understood correctly. I asked him to say it plainly. He said Britain had decided to keep the Sedona ceremony to a smaller group. I said, "Am I invited to my sister's wedding?" He said, "Not to the Sedona event, no." I said, "Okay." I said I needed to go. We hung up. I want to tell you what I felt in the next 10 minutes because I think it matters, and because I think it gets left out of stories like this in favor of the part where something satisfying happens. What I felt was not anger. Not right away. What I felt first was something embarrassingly close to grief. I had done everything right, by the metric this family had always used. I had been useful. I had been reliable. I had been the one you didn't have to worry about. And the conclusion of all that, the summary of what I was worth when the guest list got tight and the math got complicated, was that I was the one you could leave out. I thought about all the times I had arranged my own schedule around family events. All the times I had driven through bad weather to be at a dinner table I wasn't strictly needed at, just to be present. I thought about the $12,000 I had floated for my grandmother's memory care deposit, a detail my dad had surely not forgotten when he called to ask me for $14,000 more. I cried a little. Not dramatically. Just the kind of crying that happens when something you suspected about yourself is confirmed from the outside. Then I opened my laptop. The resort where Britt's wedding was being held, the one with the terracotta and the red rocks, had a room block under my family's party. I knew this because my mother had sent me the reservation link 3 weeks earlier, before all of this, back when she still assumed I'd be contributing and attending. The link gave access to the room block. I had never booked a room through it, but I had clicked it, and in clicking it, I had seen the block manager portal, which showed the reservations made against the family's block, including the primary contact who had set it up. The primary contact was me. My mother had used my email address to set up the block manager account. She had probably done it without thinking twice. I was always the one who handled logistics, always the one who read the fine print, and she had simply entered my information into the form the way you'd hand something to whoever's always been holding the clipboard. In the room block manager portal, the primary contact had administrative access. That access included the ability to modify or close the block. I want to be precise about what I did. I did not cancel other people's individual reservations. Those were protected once guests had booked. What I did was close the room block itself, which removed the group discount rate and released the remaining unbooked rooms back to general inventory. I also removed my contact information as the block manager, which triggered an automated notification to the resort that the group contact had changed, which meant Britton and my parents would need to call the resort to sort out what had happened. It took about 4 minutes. Then I booked my cabin in Asheville. 5 nights in June, overlapping exactly with the wedding weekend. I paid for it with my own credit card. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat on my apartment floor. I don't know why the floor, I just ended up there, and I felt something I did not have immediate language for. It was not triumphant, not exactly. It was more like the feeling of setting down something heavy you had been holding so long you'd stop noticing the weight. The calls started the next morning. My mother first. Her voice had lost the warm tone completely. She said the resort was calling about the room block and there was some kind of confusion with the account, and did I know anything about it? I said I had removed my contact information because I wasn't attending the wedding and it didn't seem appropriate for me to be the administrative contact for an event I'd been excluded from. She said that wasn't the point. The point was the discount had been lost. Several rooms had gone back to full rate. Cooper's aunt had already rebooked at full price and was upset. I said I was sorry to hear that. She said, "Laurel, what is happening with you?" I said, "I've been thinking the same thing." Britt called an hour later. She did not ask how I was, or whether I was okay. She opened with the room block and then moved immediately to the money I hadn't contributed, and then to the general theme of me being selfish, which was a word I had never in my 31 years been called by anyone in my family, and which landed with a specific weight. She said that I had always had everything figured out and that some of us had harder paths, and that family was supposed to mean something. I let her talk for a while. Then I said, "Am I invited to your wedding?" She said it was complicated. I said it wasn't, actually. I said it was a yes or no, and she had already given me the answer through my father, and I just wanted to hear her say it. She said the ceremony was going to be intimate. She said she hoped I understood. I said I did. I said I understood completely. I said I hoped she had a beautiful wedding, and I meant that too, genuinely. Which surprised me a little in the moment, but didn't after I'd had time to think about it. Britt was my sister. What happened between us was my parents' failure more than hers, maybe. Or maybe we had all built something together that none of us fully saw until it showed its shape in a crisis. I told her I wouldn't be at the dinner the week after either. She went quiet. That was the thing that surprised her, I think. She had expected me to be hurt, to want the consolation version of inclusion. The dinner after was for me, the smaller event, the easier event, the event that cost less and mattered less and asked nothing of anyone. I had spent my entire adult life accepting the consolation version. I said goodbye to my sister. I meant it warmly. I hung up. My dad called once more a few days later. This conversation was shorter. He said he was sorry and he sounded like he meant it, and he also said he hoped we could find our way back to each other as a family, and he said Britt was upset about the room block. I told him I was sorry about the room block too, and that I hoped he understood why I had made the choice I had. He said he was trying to. I believed him. My dad has always been trying. That has always been trying. That has always been part of the problem, and also the part I love most about him. I did not stop all financial support overnight. I want to be honest about that because I think the version of this story where someone makes a clean, dramatic exit is satisfying in a way the real version isn't. What I did was set limits. I told my parents that I was restructuring my approach to family finances. That language came from my therapist, who I started seeing in March, who also does not use words like toxic, and whose office has a small succulent on the windowsill that I find inexplicably reassuring. I told him that going forward, any request would need to come to me directly, specifically with context, and that I would evaluate it the way I evaluated any significant financial decision, on its merits, not on the assumption that my answer would be yes. My mother said that sounded very clinical. I said it was. The Sedona wedding happened in June. I know this because it exists on social media, the terracotta and the sage and the red rocks in the background. Britt in a dress that was genuinely beautiful, Cooper mid-loft with one arm around his groomsman. I looked at the photos once and then put my phone down. I was sitting on the porch of my cabin in Asheville when I saw them. It was early evening and the Blue Ridge was doing what it does at that hour. Going blue-purple at the ridgeline, going gold in the meadows, and the coffee I'd made was still warm in my mug. I thought about a lot of things sitting there. I thought about what it had cost me, not in money, but in the specific currency of being the person who holds things together. I thought about how I had confused being needed with being valued. I thought about the particular efficiency with which my family had sorted me. Dependable Laurel, capable Laurel who doesn't need fussing over, Laurel who will be fine, and how I had accepted that sorting because I didn't know yet what it was costing. I also thought about the mountains, which helped. My therapist asked me once whether I thought I had been performing reliability as a way of justifying my place in the family, whether the help had been, at some level, a bid. I sat with that for a long time. I think the answer is yes, and also more complicated than yes. I think I helped because I genuinely love my family and I genuinely could. I also think somewhere under that was a belief that if I was useful enough, necessary enough, the kind of person who handles the transmission and the roof and the memory care deposit, then I would be too valuable to leave out. I was building a case without knowing I was building it for why I should be included, and when the guest list got tight, I found out what the case was actually worth. The dinner they planned, the consolation dinner, the week after the wedding, happened without me. My aunt texted to say she missed me being there. My dad called afterward, and his voice was tired in the way it gets when something has gone wrong that he can't fully articulate. He didn't say much. I didn't either. We talked about his tomatoes, which had done well this year, and about a documentary he'd been watching about the interstate highway system. It was one of the better conversations we'd had in a while, which is its own kind of information. Britt and I have not spoken since June. I think we will, eventually. I think there is a version of a relationship available to us that is more honest than the one we had. Smaller, maybe, less assumption laden, with clearer edges. I don't know if she's willing to look for it. I am, when I'm ready. What I know is this. I spent years making myself indispensable to people who had sorted me into the category of person who doesn't need things. I thought if I removed myself from needing, if I became purely functional, purely useful, I would earn something. Not money back, not gratitude particularly, just the simple security of being someone people wanted around. I was wrong about that. You cannot earn your way into being wanted. You can only be wanted or not be wanted, and no amount of covered transmission bills changes that arithmetic. I'm saving differently now. I have one credit card. I have one investment account. The only name on it is mine. I bought a succulent for my apartment, a small one, because apparently I've started associating them with clarity. This past September, I drove back through Dayton and had dinner with my parents. Just dinner. At their kitchen table, nothing special. My mom made pot roast. My dad talked about his documentary. Nobody mentioned the wedding or the room block or the $14,000. It was ordinary in a way that felt, for the first time in a long time, like something I hadn't had to buy. If you've spent years being the person who holds everything together, the one everyone counts on, the one who reads the fine print, the one who sorts out the logistics while the room celebrates around someone else, I want to ask you something I've been asking myself. At what point does being reliable become a way of apologizing for taking up space? And when you finally stop, what happens? In my experience, much less than you feared, and much more than you expected. There's something I've been sitting with since that evening on the porch in Asheville, mug in hand, Blue Ridge going purple at the edges while my sister's wedding photos loaded on my phone. It wasn't bitterness, it was closer to recognition. The feeling of finally seeing a pattern you'd been living inside for so long it had started to look like just the shape of things. I had built my usefulness into a kind of currency. Every transmission repair, every roofing invoice, every bridge deposit. I had told myself those were just things I did because I could, because I loved my family, because that's what capable people do when the people they love need something. And all of that was true. But underneath it, if I'm honest, the way my therapist keeps gently asking me to be, there was something else running. A belief that if I made myself indispensable enough, I would be too valuable to leave out. That being needed and being wanted were the same thing. They are not the same thing. That is what Britt's wedding taught me, delivered in my dad's careful voice over the phone, not to Sedona, no. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make, and the choices other people make about us, tend to follow a logic. Not a cruel logic, not always, but a consistent one. My family had learned over years that I would absorb the cost of things, that I would read the fine print, that I would float the gap. That pattern didn't come from nowhere. I had built it, contributed to it, shown up for it reliably enough that it had calcified into expectation. When I stopped, the expectation didn't vanish. It just became visible for the first time. And that visibility was the only honest thing that had happened between us in years. What I wish I had understood earlier, and what I think is worth saying plainly, is that doing the right thing by the people you love requires a kind of moral clarity about what right actually means. It doesn't mean absorbing everything. It doesn't mean erasing your own presence from the guest list of your own life so that others have more room. Real integrity, the kind that holds up over time, has to include yourself in the accounting. The moment I closed that room block was not my proudest moment and not my worst. It was the moment I finally acted from an honest place rather than a performative one. That matters. The other thing I keep coming back to is how long I let my own understanding of the situation lag behind what the situation actually was. I had the information, I could see the pattern. I'm not someone who misses details. I read contracts for a living. But I kept filing those details away in a folder I never opened because opening it would have required me to do something uncomfortable. Intelligence without the willingness to act on what you know is just a more sophisticated form of avoidance. I know that now. And then there is the question of what it takes to actually change. Not to announce a change, not to feel a change coming, but to sit on an apartment floor with a phone in your hand and do the thing. That took something I'm still not sure I have a clean word for. Not toughness, exactly. More like the decision to stop waiting for someone to give me permission to take up space. I had been waiting for that my entire adult life without realizing I was waiting. Laurel closed the laptop, booked the cabin, made the tea. The mountains were still there in the morning. That's the part I keep returning to. The mountains were still there.